Hello then, welcome to a rather special Rugby League Down South. It was an idea put to me a couple of weeks ago to get a couple of fans together, get a couple of people together that represent Rugby League from across the South and sit down and have a chat, really, which is why we've called it Rugby League Down South, the Pubcast. We're not technically sat in the pub, although only for background noise purposes. I think we would, I'd say, much rather be there. That sounds a bit wrong, but there's a few of us round a table kindly given to us by the South Bank University, which is where the RFL in London have their headquarters. They've all arranged that, so thank you for that initially, and also thank you to BBC London. We may not do this programme on BBC London anymore, but all the equipment I have in front of me, sparse as it is, has been lent to us, so they are doing what they can to, I won't say support the programme. I literally just asked if I could borrow some stuff, and they said yes, I could. But they're still trying to do what they can to support rugby league in the South, although we don't have this programme on air at the moment. The idea came from Ron, a Broncos fan, a couple of weeks ago, and he said, why don't we just get people together and have a chat? Ron, pick up that microphone. Just tell us, why did you want to do this?
Because I think we've reached a tipping point as a club in the sense that we can't carry on doing the same things and expecting better results. We're all frustrated. We're all wondering what's going to happen. There's talk of restructure. There's uncertainty about the Broncos, given that David Hughes is only committed to the end of next year. We see some appalling performances on the pitch. The coach is accusing the team of, frankly, not even trying. So we've reached a point where we say, what on earth is going on? I know that a number of fans have asked for an open discussion with the club to get the truth, to get the facts, so that it can be explained to us how we've got into this situation. But in the absence of any positive response from that, why don't we all get together and do our own thing, Ramo? So I thought you might be well up for that.
Well, here we are, yes, having that discussion. And let's just introduce a few of the people we've got round the table as well. Nigel, Ron paints quite a bleak picture, really, of Broncos at the moment. You've been watching Broncos for quite a while. You watched the first game as Fulham back in 1980.
I did,
how do you feel the game is, Broncos are, at this moment in time?
Well, it's like Ron said, I mean, it's a rudderless ship. Nobody knows what's going on. There's no communication from the club. And it ain't what it used to be. Even when results weren't, we've never had great results, but the feeling of the club has disappeared over the last 3 or 4 years. It's just kept in the dark. It's like a mushroom farm.
And can I say, Nigel, that to me is one of the most disappointing things. We've suffered some pretty up and down performances over the years, and we've kind of got used to that. But what kept us all together was the tremendous spirit there was within the club,
exactly,
particularly amongst its supporters. Yeah. Away fans used to love coming to the grounds. There's a live band there. You're able to mingle freely. Great atmosphere. All that's gone.
Like a morgue.
Well, it's probably worth introducing a couple of other people we've got here as well. And we've got to be careful as well, because we did invite the Broncos, see if they wanted to come down. Unfortunately, there was no one that could come to the programme. So we've got to be careful that we don't accuse them of anything in particular, because they're not here to put their own case forward. But we do have a couple of people here who can talk in a semi-official capacity, and in a fully official capacity. Just on my right here is Darren Pugsley of the RFL. You're the club and community manager, is that right, for the area?
Close, mate. Club and competition manager.
Oh, nearly.
Nearly there. Yeah, club and competition manager.
And what do you think at the moment of the state of rugby league in the general South? Because you obviously see it from more than just a Broncos point of view, and you're looking at probably a couple of levels below that competition. But how is it health-wise?
It's actually very, very good, and I appreciate that the very top of the game and results, crowd attendances, and everything that goes with the Super League side isn't what people want. But in reality, at the bottom end, it's going in the right direction. It has been for a number of years. It's accelerated quite a bit, probably since 2008, 2009, and that continues. That's not stopping at the moment. And there's some other expansion. I look more after the community level, but when you look at other elements around Scholars, Hemel, Oxford, they're obviously going in the right direction as well.
We've also got here Mark Ramsdale, no relation. We always feel that we've got to point that out every time we talk, Mark. But you've just been appointed as director of Oxford Rugby League. Congratulations on that. But how do you assess the current state from a Championship 1 point of view?
I think from that perspective, I think. Thanks very much for the acknowledgement.
No
Oxford
problem.
Rugby League, delighted to be here on that basis. It's my first outing for Oxford Rugby League, so very pleased to be here. I think from a Championship 1 perspective, again, I'd echo much of what Darren has said there about development at the lower levels in terms of professional rugby league, but also the community game. I'm certainly hearing about a lot more people who are being exposed to rugby league, enjoying it, playing the game, and with the likes of Oxford Rugby League now and other Championship 1 clubs that are new to that tournament, that league, there's an opportunity for them to experience rugby league in the south of England at a professional level and really see some excellent play. The question is then, how do we translate that up the chain toward the Super League?
Well, it's great to have you here as well as Darren, another person we've got sat on the other side of the table. Well, you claimed, David, before we came on air, to be the journalist in London that's seen the most number of rugby league games in the south. Is that right?
As a journalist, I have covered more rugby league matches in London than any other journalist.
Okay, and your assessment then in 2013, midway through the season, how does it compare? Where are we? Where are we up to?
Without wishing to sound negative, there's no way around it. The Broncos are going backwards at a great rate of knots.
Why do you say that?
I think the problem with the Broncos is at Harlequins now there is a complete schism between the Union Club and the League Club, and whereas there was a lot of synergy in the first few years of Harlequins Rugby League, that has disappeared. The office used to be populated by a number of staff. There appear now to be only 3 or 4 people in administration for the entire club, and I think that has had a serious effect on everything that's gone on at the club, because there just simply aren't the people to do the jobs that need to be done. Looking lower, I think Championship 1, the Kingstone Press Cider Championship 1, as we keep being told we've got to say, they are the sponsors after all, and something that Super League doesn't have, is Championship 1 is the first or the second truly national division that Professional Rugby League has ever had. Last season was probably even more regionalised, because there were 3 Cumbrian teams as well as 2 in Wales, 2 in Lancashire, 1 in Yorkshire and London. So it was a genuinely national league. Now with Oxford, Gloucestershire, Hemel, South Wales, half the division almost is from the south, and then there's the North Wales team, Rochdale, Gateshead and Oldham. So 4 teams from the north, 5 from the south. So it's a national league. And I think rugby league is growing, but it's growing in not quite obscurity, but there's a real problem in getting publicity for Championship 1, which doesn't get the coverage that it would be nice to see. It would be nice, for instance, that Sky Sports News, when they have their results, they'll give Championship results, but not Championship 1. Again, this is a professional league. They have no problem about putting in the Scottish Division 3, which gets similar sorts of crowds to Championship 1. But Rugby League, when it goes to that level, doesn't get any mention at all. And last week, London Scholars were involved in a world record match against Gateshead, 107 points, and the first team ever to score 50 points in a losing performance in Rugby League history. Having done a fair amount of checks and spoken to a number of people, including the current RFL statistician, we can find no record of any team scoring 50 points and losing before Gateshead.
Well, we'll get on to Scholars in a minute, but from what you say, it sounds like there's concern in certain areas but promise in others. Let's introduce another guest. Got 2 more to introduce you to. Dan, you're originally from St Helens. You've been watching rugby league for 30 years, but did I hear you say before we came on air that you're a former season ticket holder? Is that right, or are you still a Broncos season ticket?
No, I'm a current season ticket holder. I've been a season ticket holder since 2006, having moved down here in 2005.
Just get a little bit close to that microphone and tell me what you think at the moment, the current state of Broncos or further afield.
I think rugby league in the south is doing pretty well at a junior level, and obviously we've seen the development of Scholars and Hemel, etc. And I believe that Coventry are due to come into the league next year, as far as I know. But with the Broncos, looking at it either as a fan's perspective or from a business perspective, what I think they lack is identity. They lack identity as a group of players. They lack identity as a brand, as in Broncos. Should they really be Broncos? And then they changed to Harlequins. Now they've gone back to Broncos. But nobody in the press really knows who they are. And I think it's been mentioned earlier, the fan base. What is our identity? At one point, when I first started going along regularly, okay, they changed the name, but there was a real club feel to the fan base. That's not there anymore.
What do you mean by that, in terms of what is no longer not there, or what would you like to see, or what would bring that back?
Just sort of a whole club ethos, really. But I think that needs to come from the top down. They need to know who they are, what they are, and who they're appealing to. They've obviously got the problem that they are a London-wide team, so they're not like Charlton or Tottenham or whoever in football. But they need to know who they are and where, for example, where are they going to play? We don't know where they're going to play. And they need to be able to appeal to that local supporter base that could be in that area. Should London Scholars, for example, be the team for North London and London Broncos be the team for West London or South London? We don't know because they haven't picked where they're going to be.
Interesting, and we'll get onto the future location and stuff, which is maybe where we can draw on those a little later. We'll talk about the general state of the game across London and the South. We'll have a specific chat about Championship 1 and especially Oxford, with Mark being here, the location for Broncos for next year and maybe the direction which they can go in. One final guest to introduce you to, Tim Griffiths. It's not your debut on the podcast, Tim. You've been updating us on the league so far. It's probably unfair to give you this as your first question, and I think we can all then bouncing off the back of what Tim says now. It's been fairly doom and gloom about the Broncos so far at the moment. If the Broncos were winning games, would we be a lot more optimistic? I mean, I just wanted to take yourself out of the fact that there's obviously a lot of pessimism around because Broncos were bottom of the table until Salford had 2 points deducted. Do you think, or do we think in this room, if the side were performing better, and I know that's not just one thing that would change, it would be a number of things, we would be a lot more positive about things?
I think a bit more positive, but not a lot more positive. There's lots of little things that you sort of get from the club. I mean, the general sort of thing, I know we've alluded to earlier, they've got a lot less admin people than they had recently, but I remember...
A lot of companies at the moment have a lot less people than they used to have.
Very true. But I remember even a couple of years ago sending an email about something to the club and never getting a response, and then sort of following it up, and then sort of attitude you get from that and the customer service, that if we want to keep floating fans, that's the sort of thing that you've got to be excellent, because you really can't afford to put anyone off. I think in terms of the on-the-field stuff, obviously people are going to go and watch a winning team, because once you've got a winning team, or even a team that's not necessarily winning but battling and doing well, and the odd shock, perhaps a cup run, which against all odds we seem to be doing this year.
You never know, fingers crossed.
But I think you've got a team that's not doing well and not looking like they're ever going to do well in the near future. I think it just puts off people who might sort of float along, see one game, get brought along by a friend, and they just think, well, is this what I want to go and see, or do I want to perhaps go down a division and see a Championship 1 club, or do we lose out to the plethora of other sports and opportunities that are available in London?
Who else wants to jump in? If Broncos are doing better, would we be as pessimistic, Ron?
Well, certainly a winning side would help, but we've never actually had a consistently winning side in London, and I think I stand corrected by the statistician on this, but I don't think we've made the playoffs since 2006, in the days of Mark McClendon and Solomon Amono. I don't know any other club that's got that record of failure or total lack of success, and I don't know what other club would actually thrive in that kind of playing record.
Widnes,
though, is a slightly different case, because
agreed,
they've had the sort of promotion and relegation issue, haven't they, and so on. To me, though, where we are at the moment is a number of missed opportunities, and I would love to know, I don't know if you know, David, but I would love to know why the merger with Harlequins never really succeeded. To me, that was a golden opportunity. Why would you want to adopt the same shirt, the same name, and yet operate in an entirely autonomous way. And had that succeeded, would we still be in this position today?
Well, it's an interesting question, David. I mean, from my take on it, the Broncos at the time had no real other alternative and had to do it, and part of the merger and the only way out for them, other than being bailed out, which nobody likes, was to go in with Harlequins and take the name and take the shirt. For whatever reason, it didn't work from a business perspective, and Harlequins Rugby Union at that point started to increase their gates, improve their performances, and they ended up in a position where they didn't need Broncos, and actually that maybe money that they got initially. I mean, David, take that on.
Well, the point I was going to make is exactly that. When the name change happened, Harlequins were playing in the second tier of Rugby Union. They got relegated, and they were looking for another... my understanding is they were looking for another revenue stream. The name change was a deal breaker. I spoke with Mark Evans, who was then Chief Executive of Harlequins, at the launch of Harlequins Rugby League, and I said, there is a perception amongst Rugby League fans, especially in the North, that if there is one name that is hated in Rugby Union more than any other, it would be Harlequins, because of what Harlequins used to stand for. And he said Harlequins taking the name of the Rugby League club was a deal breaker, and it would have to be. To me, it would have been better to say something Twickenham team or something like that, just to give some idea of what part of London they played in. London is too big a city to have a team named after it, because if you think that it's something like 24 miles from north to south or east to west, that's the same distance to travel that you'd get in the same time as to go from Hull to Salford. And you can't say that that is a local game, but from Scholars to Broncos by road, you'd have to allow about an hour and a half, which is about the same as from Hull to Salford.
Nigel?
I mean, it's all a bit of history, and I mean, I think the rebrand to London Broncos was complete nonsense. I mean, I used to get stopped quite a lot wearing a Harlequin shirt, and you could then introduce the fact that no, it wasn't Rugby Union, it was Rugby League, and now nobody knows who the hell London Broncos are. And it
so
was the
you'd
same
rather be Harlequins?
Yes, certainly would, as with that. And I have no idea why. Well, the rumours I've heard is we're leaving the Stoop because of money. The fact is, the season tickets are ridiculously cheap there anyway, and I'm convinced that most of the nutters that are left as fans would pay more to stay there.
I mean, I wonder, while we got a few people together, and I don't know whether certain people in the room want to vote, but just show of hands, who would rather be Harlequins Rugby League? 3. And who would rather be London Broncos?
I would rather be either London something or a region of something of London than Harlequins, because for whatever reason...
Pull that mic closer, David.
For whatever reason, the team will not be playing at the Twickenham Stoop next season. My understanding is it's that at Harlequins' request, the reason that the Bradford Bulls game got moved to Adams Park, Wickham, and the Catalan Dragons game was played at Esher Rugby Union Club was that the club was effectively kicked out of their home ground at 2 weeks' notice because the pitch was destroyed by the Rugby Union, and then they played one Rugby League game on the wet pitch and did a little bit more damage, but they had to reseed for the end of season. And the result of that was that the Broncos were basically made, well, we don't want you here. And how much of this is actually the truth that Harlequins don't want the Broncos?
Don't need them, I think, and it's not that they don't want them. As far as I've had it explained to me, it's going to be very expensive for Broncos to stay at the Stoop. Whether it's expensive now, I'm not sure, or how much that's changing potentially in the future, I've never been told that. But when you add the numbers up, it is very expensive, and if you look at other options which they've been given, which is why they've been exploring it, they save quite a lot of money. In respect of how much they'd save compared to how much David Hughes spends every year, it's a fraction. I don't know, a fifth, a sixth, an eighth, something like that. So it's not masses of money, but they're going to be saving a significant amount, which could be a player. Let's put it that way. Something equivalent to that.
Ramo, my point about this was that it's a missed opportunity. And had Harlequins liked what they saw in terms of increased revenue, constant use of the ground, etc., exposure on TV, then I'm sure the Harlequins board may have bought into the rugby league side, and I know that was an option.
But I think
for whatever reason it was turned down.
But I mean, the two chief movers, Lenigan and Evans, are long gone now, and that's the problem. That's history now. I mean, it's interesting you say about a winning team would be feeling different, and I suppose it goes back to the crowds. I mean, you only got to go back 10 years when the Harlequins rugby union crowds were pretty appalling.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I mean,
they've improved phenomenally, really, from about 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 to now selling out the Stoop.
Now, we get knocked for the crowds, but you're bumping along the bottom. There's no marketing. There's very little media coverage, despite the best efforts of the people, who are committed, or should be committed. But, they've turned it around by being successful.
Well, they have, and, the RFL needs to look at its strategy behind this, because whilst we accept that it's got a strategy to be a national game, how can you be a national game without the club at the top being so unsuccessful and, frankly, the butt of a lot of criticism, not just from its supporters but from the entire game?
Dan?
Sorry, I think it's just worthwhile saying, does anybody here know what Mark Evans is doing now?
Yeah, he runs Melbourne Storm.
Correct.
And Mark Evans said very memorably once that we've never seen the best of rugby league at the Stoop, so how can we know whether it's been successful or not?
And I think
he was right.
There's also an argument, along the success. Nigel, you touched on it. It's not that Harlequins, in my opinion, don't want Broncos there. It's that they don't need them. Now, if they were turning over bigger crowds, if they were at the other end and they were maybe getting the profile that you talked of, Ron, then there might be an element there that it's a different decision for them. We'll move on to the location stuff in a moment. I just want to draw on a couple of other things. Obviously, we've got you here, so let's talk about Broncos' new signing for this week. Obviously, Craig Gower left a couple of weeks ago, but now the signing of Jamie Soward, a good move. I said, people have told me he's a class act. I don't see any NRL, so I'm not sure. Could he rejuvenate the squad? He is one of a few of Tony Ray's own signings. He's not brought many people in. So is this a crucial signing for him?
I think he's a huge signing if he gets his visa and he can actually play.
As far as I'm aware, there won't be any problems with the visa, provided he does get it and the plans go on schedule. He'll be able to register in time for the Challenge Cup as well, which is the way I understand it. There seems to be no obstruction to that at the moment.
I think, as a rugby league journalist, as someone who's watched a lot of his games, not so much this season, but in past seasons, I think he's an outstanding scrum half, probably a better scrum half than Craig Gower, probably a better leader than Craig Gower in terms of on the field getting his team around the pitch, and that was one of Gower's biggest strengths. He's coming into a terrible side that has got a losing attitude, which I think may be a problem. But if he can bring the enthusiasm that he seems to have shown in his former career, then he will be a huge signing, and he's also a very good goal kicker. By the way, just to take up your point, Ron, the last time the Broncos made the playoffs was 2003, and the last time the Broncos had a winning season was 2003 when they won 14 and lost 12.
Did they not make the playoffs in 2005?
Missed out by 1
I thought they played Bradford away in the first round.
They lost to St Helens was their last playoff.
No.
It was a Bradford fixture
definitely
away,
Bradford.
2005, I think.
Solomon Amono's last game, remember?
We'll check
it
that
well.
online. Nigel, you wanted to chip in?
Yeah, just Tony Ray's first signing. I mean, it wasn't like Tony Ray went out and got him. It was just he happened to become available, didn't he?
But
it wasn't
what I'm saying is that Tony Ray has inherited a squad, and he hasn't.
In a sense, you've inherited Soward, though, because it's we probably won't inherit Blake Ferguson, but that'd be nice.
But it was just a point that
it
was one of the people that he's actually brought in. I mean, do you think he'll be good? I mean,
how are you going to go as a good scrum half behind a pack that keeps getting battered every week?
The standoff.
Yeah.
The only sort of slight caveat I'd add to that is, having watched a bit of NRL and Australia in general, he hasn't been playing consistently for the Dragons lately. He's been at odds with the club management there. He's been down in the Cutters, the sort of second grade side. He's been in and out of their side even, so he's not even been playing consistently for them. And the shame of it is as well that he's not going to be here long term. He's off to Penrith at the end of the year.
That's
anyway,
the deal, though, isn't it? There's no potential for any future anyway. Just a few comments I had on Twitter. Steve saying, terrific player, great goal kicker. He's played Origin for New South Wales recently. Andy saying, good move. He'd like to see him combined with Witt. Joe says, great kicking game, very quick. Let's hope he comes to play. Chris, a class act. He's been well short of form, though, for some time. It'll certainly be a boost after Gower. Blue Bag said that's a great signing. He'll do well. Steve saying, let's hope it starts an upward turn in fortunes. And Blindside Flanker on Twitter at Ian Ramsdale said, a beacon of light amidst the poor results and so many players leaving for other clubs and rugby union at the moment. What do we think? I mean,
Jamie Soward's got terrific pace. That's his great. He's got a great kicking game, but he's also extremely quick. He's as quick as Dixon, and he might well bring out the best in Michael Witt. Michael Witt, I always felt somehow a bit constrained by playing with Craig Gower, and it was noticeable that Witt played at his best when Gower wasn't there. And I'm hoping that Soward will bring the best out of Michael Witt, who's a talent, but he's a confidence player.
Well, let's talk a little bit about next year as well. There was a comment there from Blindside Flanker saying, amidst the poor results and so many players leaving for other clubs, there's a number of players at Broncos at the moment under contract for 2014. I think there was a story the other day saying that there was no talks about any further contracts. I'm told that was rubbish. So there's one word against the other, I guess. Some interesting comments from Ian Millward on the Super League show, which were drawn to my attention. He says Sargentson to Wigan. Which is a rumour and could well happen. I think Sargentson's out of contract at the end of this year.
He is, yes. But his agent specifically only committed him to the end of this licence period. And if Wigan come in with an offer, then who knows? So
the end of this licence period, not the end of this year?
That's what I was told. Okay. But whether he could be persuaded to move on, Ian might produce a few bucks here and there, who knows?
Ian also said the quality of the Aussie players at Broncos aren't good enough. He also drew back to the lack of success for Broncos as well, and the fact that they need to win something really to create a bit of a wave of interest within the team. And because that didn't come within the early years, and then maybe even the early years of Super League, there was almost the Challenge Cup win. There was there's been playoff games, but they've never really gone anywhere. I wonder whether some success may help in the future. Ian did say, though, I don't mean to sweep them aside. I think they need some special treatment. It's something that people have said for a while, that they needed to be treated in a special way. Maybe he was talking about an increase in salary cap. I'm not sure quite in particular.
Brian McDermott made a good point about that. Is that, as I understand it, Broncos don't get any dispensation for housing costs or anything like that.
No, with the salary
and he equated the difference between living in Castleford to living in Richmond as 3 Super League players.
So that's the difference. So technically Broncos...
Yeah, we miss out on 3 Super League players
because
the RFL won't give us special dispensation for that.
It's an interesting topic. I mean, what do we think? Is allowing David Hughes to pump in even more money? Is that the way forward?
Does David Hughes have the extra money to pump in if we were allowed to have a higher salary cap? And the other issue as well, obviously you said about the difference in the living costs equates to a couple of Super League players. We've also got the fact that we pay quite a lot of money in rent. And other Super League clubs own their own ground. And from what I understand of what the present rent is per year, that equates, to my knowledge, to about 2 pretty decent Super League players. Yeah. So again, we're going backwards before we even start.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Tim?
Another bit on this is, of course, Brian Barwick's comments during the week saying, London might not be here forever. In 5-10 years, it might be time to take up, I think he said, a tough decision.
An adult decision.
Well,
yeah. And Dave Hadfield's piece for the Independent, an interesting article if you want to go read it. I think he's right to say what he's saying, and reading between the lines, and again, nice journalism spin. Broncos might not be around. He thinks the unthinkable. I think was the headline of the piece. That Broncos and London may not exist in the future, and all these people trot out the fact that Sky need London. I never quite understood that one in particular. Whether Sky TV need a London aspect. I'm not sure the argument behind that one.
Only that it's close to their studios is the only reason I can think behind it.
They spend all their other weekends on road in the north. I've never really got why Sky need to be in London.
I think the Super League viewing figures are quite high down south, and it helps the advertising. That's what I've heard.
They definitely do, but I don't think that people in London tune in to watch Broncos. No. They tune in because they are fans.
Because we're hardly ever on.
But also the fact that they're fans, aren't they, that now move to London and they want to watch Super League. They want to keep in touch with how their side.
If we were a successful side, then they would come, etc.
It's all at the moment we're all talking about success.
But you see. It's not just success for we're all, as Ron said, he's a rugby league crusader. Did you say evangelist? Well, I think probably all of us are.
I think
here.
Definitely say.
And if rugby league is going to be taken seriously, it's got to do well internationally. And we've got a big chance this year with the World Cup, which will get a lot of media coverage. Hopefully, if we do well. But then on the back of that, then to be a national game, you've got to have a successful team in the capital. And if they don't help in some way, then it's...
Well, maybe this Brian Barwick reading underneath the headline is actually a good story. Because I think what he was saying was, we need to do something different in London to make them a success. Yes. And I'm going to give them 5 or 10 years. Now, again, Brian Barwick said in the piece, he's not an expert on rugby league, he doesn't profess to be an expert, but he is learning, he's looking at how it works. Maybe this is a way of him saying, London needs some help, we're going to do whatever we can, and we're going to give it a certain period of time to say, look, let's see what we can do within that time.
I know we certainly the game hasn't got the war chest that the NRL now has, but I don't know what the NRL had 10 years ago, but they didn't just stick Melbourne Storm into the AFL territory and say, get on with it. They supported them hook, line and sinker, and similarly the AFL didn't stick the Sydney Swans, the new team in Sydney, and say get on with it.
I think, from my opinion as well, we've got to be very careful drawing comparisons with the NRL. It's completely different, and I think sometimes you mentioned being a rugby league evangelist. Everyone in this room enjoys rugby league, the sport, the game, wants it to succeed, but we can't get carried away with ourselves sometimes. And I don't think putting the salary cap up in any way is going to help our game in this country. That's just my personal opinion. But David,
I think that's right. Just looking at the 14 teams in Super League, there are 5 teams who are in a ground share arrangement. If you take that Salford are now sharing with Sale, and there are 9 teams that are own their own ground. That's Warrington, Widnes, St Helens, Castleford, Wakefield, Leeds, Hull KR, Catalan and Bradford. They are the owners of their ground. Huddersfield share with the football club, Hull FC share with the football club, Wigan share with the football club, Salford have got Sale, and the Broncos currently are playing at the Stoop with Harlequins. So the majority of teams are the main owners of their ground, and I think that is a huge benefit. And the fact is that the London club has never had their own home other than the time at Chiswick when they were the only team playing there. And if anyone who knows who actually went to Chiswick knows what a barren and fairly bleak place that was, especially in midwinter on that far bank.
Let's talk about the grounds then and the future of Broncos. It is the big question. I said on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, I don't think the uncertainty over where the club is going to be next year helps across all levels, and including the people that are playing for the side and working for the club as well. Let's not forget them. At the moment, we have no idea. The club are keeping their cards close to their chest. There's a couple of front runners. Nigel, you said before you'd rather have them as Harlequins. Would you rather see them stay at the Stoop then?
Well, the money's the issue, but the Stoop's a great ground,
It is.
And a great facility. People whinge about having to walk 10 minutes from the station, but, Harlequins
It's not like it's a summer sport or anything, is it? So.
No, that's right. You've managed to get sort of 85,000 people into the big concrete bowl across the road a few times a year, and 12,500 to Quins in the middle of winter. So, I mean, if they move to Gillingham, that's me done.
Gillingham came up last year because it was from what I understand, very close on to be, signed, sealed, and delivered almost. And it did seem that there was a cheap option. It gave them an option that saved them a lot of money. And looking at the success of I will say the success of the 2 games they've had down there. I know on the field, particularly this year, it wasn't great, but it did look like a viable option. I do think the club have retracted though and thought, do you know what, moving out of London isn't what they want to do.
I just noticed the crowd was 900 less. That was almost 25% down on last season.
But it was also one of the highest for a home game for a Broncos.
That much I'm not questioning. But the point was, last year, Gillingham made huge plays, or Medway made a huge play on the fact they were going to get 4,000. And I know they were only just under 100 short of that, but they didn't get to the target figure. How many fans who are regular travellers who go to the Twickenham Stoop would go to Gillingham to see the team lose every week? I don't think they would, and I don't think the Kent fans would go in numbers to make it viable at Gillingham in the same way. And I think one of the big problems is the fact, and I think it would mask an awful lot of issues, but a winning team would have an entirely different feel to everything that we've said tonight. If the team was currently, say, 9 wins, 2 draws and 7 defeats, as opposed to 3 wins and 13 defeats, I don't doubt we'd have an entirely different feeling about how things were, because there was success on the field, and that would build interest, and B, people would actually want to come and watch the team.
Well, it will also, from that point of view, I think at the moment people can look at it, and especially people who don't know the game and don't know the sport in the South, look at it and go, oh, Broncos are looking for another option, they're looking for an alternative venue, they're looking to try somewhere different. Whereas if Broncos were competing in the league, it can be seen as an opportunity. Where are they going next? What they're deciding to move the side on by moving somewhere. And I think it's an important point to make, because if you try and remove the fact that they are currently in the lower echelons of Super League, is there an opportunity? Is there a good reason to go somewhere different next year? Because it will save them money. Maybe they can pay for an extra player. I mean, is there an advantage, Tim, to them going somewhere different, somewhere new?
I think yes, it would bring the novelty factor back again. But then, how many times has that been the case and done again? One thing I did sort of think of, and I've heard a couple of people mention, is Brentford have got a new stadium being built at the moment. They are actively looking for a rugby club to share with. They've made that very clear that it's part of their business model, and they've got the facilities, and it will be built with a rugby club in mind. That was, a very good place, I felt, to play originally location-wise, because you had both the tube and the train there. Is that possibly an option going forward?
Dare I mention...
I think London Wasps have got their eye
Yes,
on that.
I was just going to say Wasps. And I think, again, from a business point of view, if you're a football club, you're looking for a rugby club, and somebody says you've got Wasps here and you've got Broncos here, from a business decision, I think it's kind of a no-brainer. So I think that's kind of put Broncos out the running with that one. I mean, let's bring Mark Ramsdale back into it. Mark, you're recently appointed director of Oxford Rugby League. You've obviously, the club is new to Oxford this year, going to a new area, although we would still be in London. Is there an advantage? What have you seen of the people of Oxford sort of pricked up their ears to come along and watch?
I think taking rugby league to a new location actually can work, and I think Oxford demonstrates that very well. We're getting some good crowds in an inaugural season, over 350 people only after about half the season gone. And a lot of interest. I think people take to rugby league very quickly when they see it. Our on-field product is fantastic. It's second to none. And when they see rugby league being played at a good level, such as Championship 1, then I think that they do enjoy it. The summer season works very well in places like that. And I think, to some extent, in the likes of Oxford, Gloucester and Hemel, they're kind of crying out for more summer sports for their kids to do as much as anything else. And I know part of our business model is to engage with communities and get more kids involved, playing sport. Generally, they know rugby, they'll know rugby union, but at a young age, we just want to get them running out with a ball in their hands and enjoying it. And if we can convert them to playing as they grow older and playing 13-man code, then I think we'll do very well.
Now, I think over the weeks of this programme, the months we've done it, and the years we've done it, in fact, I've been accused of being championing the move to Gillingham, which I've always just put the positives or negatives of any particular scenario. I've never really favoured one or the other. In fact, I do in my head, but I'm a journalist, I'll keep impartial, and hopefully I'll try and portray that on the air. Maybe not. I don't favour the Gillingham move, put that on record now. Where do we think the club will be next year? The big rumour is that it will be the Hive, Barnet's old training ground, which is where they've moved the club to play for next season, having been relegated from League Two to play in the conference for next year. As I said, the club are being very secretive. They're not giving any details away. I can't add anything to, I guess, what has been said at the moment, in that I think it is an option, and I think there are other options as well on the table. But I mean, I don't know, where do you think? Where does it look likely, and where would you be happy with?
Somewhere where the flagship club of Super League in the south can feel proud to call their home, and I'm not sure the Hive meets that description. Because it's small. Because I believe it's got a reasonable transport infrastructure, but it's in a far part of North London. It's in the scholars' territory, and if you live in Surrey or Sussex or Kent, it's a hell of a long way to go, etc., etc. For me, I would rather we stayed at the Stoop. It's a fantastic ground. It's one of the best in Super League. People love going there. Let's make the Stoop work. I don't know what the financial situation is around that, but if you said to me purely which ground would you prefer, that would be my response.
So thoughts of Ron, Nigel?
Well, I hope we're at Wembley in August.
Well, playing in North London by the end of the year might be the way of putting it. David?
As a North West London resident, the Hive is wonderful for me. Getting to the Twickenham Stoop is real pain. Gillingham would be a non-starter for me, to be perfectly honest. The big problem with the Twickenham Stoop is that it's not on the underground, and as someone who has been to all but one of the London Broncos' home grounds, from Wales to the south of France to the Midlands to wherever else they have played, the fact is that Brentford was on the underground, Fulham was on the underground, Chiswick was a bust from the underground, with the National Rail Station very infrequently. If it's on the underground, the number of fans that can actually get to a game goes up dramatically, and I think it has a big bearing. Fans do not want to use National Rail to get to sport.
I think the crucial thing is, if you are in London, being on the underground helps. If you are to be not on the underground map, then you play in Wickham, you call yourself Wickham or whatever. That's the way that it works. If you are London, being on the tube map definitely helps, because when people want to get there, the people that live within London might want to travel. I don't.
Some people would be happy unless we turfed over Trafalgar Square and played
went
there.
On there. I think there is an element of, to be fair, wherever it is, as long as you can get there, then it works. Darren.
Yeah, just probably from a slightly different perspective, really. A bit of a curveball, I guess. Was one of the things we've talked about is performances and results on the pitch, and the focus on the move is what's the ground like, what's the transport links, and they're extremely important. But for me, from probably a coaching playing background, looking at that side of things, if you want a successful team on the field, you need to give your team the best possible environment to prepare every week. Yeah. So that has to be a huge consideration. I mean, I've been to Leeds and seen the environment that they train in, and I've been to Roehampton and I've seen the environment the Broncos train in. And for your team to be successful, that's a big consideration. Look for a place that gives you a good stadium, but gives the players the best training and recovery and every possible aspect that you can to give them a fighting chance on the field.
The Hive is a brand new facility. It's only been fully open for a couple of years.
Would they move to train there if they did go there? Because that's the question mark. You mentioned Roehampton, where Broncos train, and the facilities aren't as good as Leeds or Wigan, and they do live around there. So and they pay extra rent to rent those training facilities as well. So I'm not sure whether they would actually move to buy it to train as well. That's again probably something that is being worked out at the moment.
There are a number of pitches around that are. There's 2 4G pitches that are there, and there are also a large number of grass pitches. It used to be a playing fields area. I think it was Faithful, the Jewish club, used to play all their matches there. They had 7 or 8 pitches. There are still 4 or 5 pitches that are there all the time, as well as the main stadium, which is brand new. It's only been handed over, I believe, to Barnet Football Club this month. It's brand new build. So, although it'll only be a 5,000 or 6,000 capacity, when the Broncos are getting 3,000, 4,000 at most, 4,000 in a 6,000 stadium is going to look a great deal better than 1,800, 2,000 in a 12,000 stadium.
Mark?
Just want to pick up on one of David's points earlier. I think wherever a London-based Super League team is going to be situated, it's always going to have that problem. It doesn't matter if it's going to be at Twickenham or in Barnet. And I think, transport infrastructure is great for those that are in London, and appreciate we want to grow the London side in particular. But just throwing it out there, what about the transport links for those who are away fans and coming down? And I think a North London base might provide an opportunity. It might knock 45 minutes, an hour off a journey, but when you look at coach cost, transport cost to bring travelling fans down, that can make a big difference.
It's 15 minutes off. So it's 15 minutes off the M1 at most to get there, and it is very close. It's not as close as Allianz Park is to the bottom of the M1, which could hardly be much closer, but it is very close to the M1, which does make it very much more accessible than having to go around the M25 to get to Twickenham.
Tim?
There is a certain appeal in being only, getting, say, 4,000 in a 5,000-6,000 ground, because you can make it, a decent atmosphere, and it will feel, if you get the right sort of stadium, it will feel quite tight. The only curveball I would throw in, and it's been sort of discussed a few times, of what about the polite way of putting it is the circus plan of playing, a game north, a game south, a game west, a game east. Some people, would say that, it would just be too disruptive, but would it help generate the buzz that you could say, right, rugby league's coming here, and then it's going to, if you picked 4, 6 venues and you could play 2 free games a season in each, you could have, one at the beginning, one in the middle, one at the end. Could you generate something through that?
Do you know? I think it's a great idea. I don't think it would work with Broncos for various reasons, but I would love to see them do it. It's not going to happen though. Ron, as a season ticket holder, would you like them to do that? Would you mind going around different places?
Yes, I would.
You would. You want them to have a home.
I want them to have a home, and I think if you ask any player, they tell you exactly the same as well. They see it being a big advantage for them to play in the same venue. One of the things I'd like to ask you, Ian, about this is, we've talked about saving money by going into a smaller venue and so on. Do you know what David Hughes' plans are after the end of next season? I mean, has he given you any indication? Because if you're talking money, you're talking David's plans, aren't you?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I spoke to David very briefly at which game did I go to? Just the Wigan game. I spoke to him briefly at the end of that game, in fact. And as far as I'm aware, he's obviously pledged the club that he will be involved for this franchise period that takes us to the end of 2014. You could maybe guess, and this is completely my guess, in his final year, he wants to see what can be done, save a bit of money, buy a new player, see what happens. I don't know. Maybe give it one final go. There is the potential that if you do go to another ground, you might be either looking for extra investment or people might want to invest in the club. So there might be a different financial setup to the club next year. That might change David's opinion on whether he wanted to then go forward. I don't know. I have had no indication from David as to whether he would go beyond the next licence period. But who knows? Maybe if they nail down a new ground and they're happy and they sign a 4-year contract or whatever it is, he'll then pledge another 3 years. The conversation that I always come back to is whenever you talk to David Hughes about putting money into the club, he'll always say he's obviously got to get this past his wife, because the number of years that he continues to support the club, and when you think about it's phenomenal. Imagine your bank account with a load of zeros on the end. The money that he pumps into London Rugby League, at the Super League level, is phenomenal. And imagine if he wasn't doing that.
Yes.
Imagine the money he would have in his pocket.
Yes.
So I'm going to check my Euro Millions results.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't buy a ticket tonight. Was that yesterday?
No, tonight.
It was tonight.
You're too late.
140 million.
But Ian, the thing about David's money is it's not been spent wisely. And I don't know who's in charge of recruitment at the Broncos, but some of the signings that David made to spend to the full salary cap have been, frankly, extremely disappointing, and why we're in this situation now.
Well, I think as well it's maybe shown, hasn't it, that the club hasn't performed at the level that he was expecting or hoping they would at that point. Let's just have a chat about a few other things while we're all here as well, and while we've got specific people in the room. Tim, I'm going to come to you in a minute about Oxford, because I know you're the announcer at the ground there, but we've got one of the directors, as we've mentioned, Mark. We've talked a little about Oxford so far. What do you think of Championship 1 and how it's going this year? Because they've expanded it. They've included more geographical teams. David was mentioning before, it's the first really national league. Well, it is not really. It is the first national league that the competition has ever had. How has it gone? How is it going? And how are Oxford doing?
Overall, I think it's going pretty well. I think the fact that we've got teams that are geographically more southern based, it works very well. And I think that's where actually Broncos suffers. We don't have in London a common rivalry, whereas obviously St Helens play Wigan. And it's a 2-minute drive down the road, really. I think that's the challenge for Broncos. But when you've got the likes of Oxford and Hemel and Gloucester that are relatively close together, still pretty far apart in some cases, I think that makes it a lot easier, and I think that has been quite telling.
Is your local derby against Gloucestershire?
Yes, I think.
What about the Scholars?
I think that's the challenge. I mean, that's quite interesting in its own right. Who will eventually become our team that we want to face down year in, year out.
It's the Oxford accent and the Gloucester accent. Well, I went to the Rochdale game. I didn't go to Gillingham to watch us get thumped, and I actually had another reason to go to Oxford as well on the Sunday. Dropped about 6 suitcases off for my son for the end of the term. Left him to fill him up and went down to a great afternoon. Another Broncos season ticket holder was there who comes up from Aldershot, and a guy from Oxford who used to be a season ticket holder. Great game. Showing the loss the Bronco-esque defence in the second half, really, I thought.
Yeah, very much.
I think what you get in Championship and Championship 1 are two teams that are incredibly passionate, in most cases quite similar in terms of ability, and that creates for a great spectacle. And I think above all else, that's what rugby league can give to fans and spectators and draw them in, and that's where Oxford Rugby League is successful, because once people see it at Iffley Road, they'll come again.
Well, I've been to Scholars a few times. Where I live in Surrey, actually sort of worked out, it takes me about an hour and a bit to get I can beat Iffley Road in an hour.
I live in Surrey, and I go to Oxford every week. So yeah.
Well, Nigel, you mentioned that you've obviously been to see Oxford. Tim, you see a lot of Oxford.
Yep.
You keep your eye on Championship 1. What have you made of it this year?
I've absolutely loved it, and I've loved the whole division. I've been to a few games, not just Oxford games. I've been to a couple of games at Scholars, one at Hemel as well, and it's real open game. The only sort of thing is the dual registration skews a few bits, partly in. I think there are indications that's probably not going to last in the form it is longer term. But it's been absolutely, there's some great players, great personalities, and the fans that follow those clubs are just as great and just as passionate as the fans. And we had some Castleford fans stop in on their way back from the Broncos game. One of the games we've also had, a huge chorus of North Welsh supporters that were drowning out anyone trying to talk in the bar for about half an hour. And it's been it's been great rugby to watch, as well as the social side as well.
Dan, you sort of nodded along there when we talked about dual registration. We'll get your thoughts on that in a second. But Mark, how have you seen the dual registration thing with Oxford?
Well, we've got a position whereby we won't really use dual registration for us. I think it's a strategic decision for each club to adopt whether or not they want to do that. And some clubs have used it and used it to their advantage and have done very well and are at top of the league. And they have different aspirations from Oxford Rugby League, which for us it's a strategic decision to stay as a community-based club, at least for the first few seasons, bed in and then grow in the community. For those more established clubs, and Scholars obviously utilise Broncos players in this respect, they have a clear pathway. And they do have the ability to use the dual registration, and they do, and it can work. But I think, again, it's one of those things that we all either need to do or perhaps we all need to not do. I think it's one of those things. It can work very, very well, but if you're just using players from the likes of Wigan to come in and dominate your opposition, I don't think that's really one of the things that we as a club would really endorse.
Dan? Yeah, I think dual registration can work. I think we've seen it at Hemel, where Mikey Bichet's been playing for them, and then he's come in when we really needed him, I suppose. But obviously, when he comes into play for London Broncos, what happens at Hemel? I see on their website they've got a halfback crisis because one of their better players has just been dragged back to his Super League club. So I think the Championship and Championship 1 clubs do need to be careful with that they don't become over-reliant upon those players, and I think that's where your thinking is with Oxford, probably.
I think it's down to the spirit of the dual registration rather than the kind of Machiavellian strategic elements. I think if you adopt it for what it is, and that's to bring on players perhaps that aren't quite ready for Super League to give them some match practice, then yeah, it's great. But if you're just there to try and win a league, I'm not necessarily sure that's the best thing to do.
Well, this was the point I was about to make. I've been a huge fan of the idea of the Broncos and Scholars having some form of synergy together, with players being sent on loan to the Scholars from the Broncos, not just for the games, but to train with them as well, to give them the Super League training experience, so that they can actually pass on their Super League experience off the field and on the field to Championship 1 players. I'm not sure that someone, and I'll take this because he played on Sunday, Urjon Delapi, who's in and out of the Broncos team, not quite yet ready for Super League, trains with the Super League club, plays for the Scholars, goes back to the Super League club. That is not how the spirit of the rule should be adhered to. When the Scholars got beaten by Whitehaven in the Northern Rail Cup playoff game, there were 3 players who'd been in the St Helens team that lost to the Broncos 2 weeks earlier, who were brought in to play against the Scholars, who had equally rested players, and it was perfectly within the rules. And I described it as being not right, not because they were cheating. There was no cheating. It was perfectly all right. And in the same game, Mike Bichet played, who had already played in the Northern Rail Cup for Hemel, now played for the Scholars because he could, and that's not right either. I think the idea of a dual registration should be that the player is with the club for a month, as not unnecessarily as a hard loan, but with the club for a month, and he will learn for a month and spend a month with the club, passing on his experience as a Super League player to the club. And I think that would be a far better way than the current mishmash where a player comes in, goes out, and comes in and goes out. I don't think that does anybody any real favours.
You're still awake, Darren?
Still here, yeah.
I just thought, we've not spoken to you for a while. Well, while we're talking about the success of London, the South East, I know that in recent weeks, Mark, you're the Secretariat of the All-Parliamentary Rugby League Group, is that right?
All-Party Parliamentary Rugby League.
I always forget the P.
Yeah, just say Parliamentary Rugby League Group.
Parliamentary Rugby League Group, mouthful. And I think a few of the Championship 1 sides came down to one of your meetings down at the Houses of Parliament a couple of weeks ago. So I thought I'd catch up with the chair of your group, just recently elected for another year, and Greg Mulholland MP, to find out what it was like and what he makes of the progression of rugby league in the South.
Well, I didn't manage to talk to Greg. I was trying to get hold of him, but I think he was busy. Voting, I think, was one thing I was told, so probably some important business. So we'll catch up with Greg on the programme next week. And to be fair, I could probably just cut this part out of the podcast altogether and wiped it from memory, but that wouldn't make the next bit anywhere near as funny.
Hopefully. That was Greg Mulholland MP, the chair of the All Parliamentary Rugby League. Did you see how seamlessly we did that as well, Ron? Sitting in our little... I've called it the Pubcast. It's not quite the pub, is it? We're sat in the boardroom. Isn't it, Darren, in the South Bank University?
It is the boardroom indeed.
If you want to see a picture, go to my Twitter feed, twitter.com/Ian Ramsdale. You'll see a number of people sat around a long table, I feel like Obama. Or sat at the end. It's like the cabinet meeting. Oh, is it like the cabinet meeting, Mark? Or is it nothing like it?
Can't possibly say.
Do they wear rugby shirts around the table?
I think some would if they could, yeah.
It's like the G8 meeting in Northern Ireland.
Of course. Slightly more important.
And they're rated as here.
We've got a couple of minutes left of the podcast now. It's been great to have a chat with everyone and discuss, sort of how you feel that the sport is. We talk Broncos, talk Scholars, talk Hemel. In fact, we should probably congratulate Hemel on a victory over Crusaders at the weekend. Amazing, really. They're having such a great season. So good to see. And I know Troy Perkins on the programme a couple of weeks ago said things are going to start getting tough, and the games are getting tough, and they're coming out on top as well. So great to see them going so well, and without Mike Bichet as well. That game at the weekend they've had on dual registration, so congratulations to them. I'm sure we'll catch up with them on future programmes here on Rugby League Down South. But we've talked about a lot of pessimism, really, about the game, and particularly about Broncos in the state that they're in at the moment, with them languishing down at the bottom of the table. I want to finish off with your thoughts on where the game should move forward. Not necessarily the Broncos, not necessarily Scholars, not Hemel, anyone in particular. What you would like to see done, because right at the beginning of the programme, when we went round the table, there were so many people that said there are so many good things happening. It's not like it is all doom and gloom. There are plenty of good things happening. At the moment, it isn't filtering through to the Broncos, and they're not performing in Super League. But a lot of people from outside the region look at that and say Rugby League in the South isn't working. I had a conversation on Twitter with someone today who said a lot of people say that Rugby League in the South doesn't work. And we need to get over that. And there's only one real way of getting over that, and that's success. So how can success be brought to Rugby League in this area? And hopefully we'd be sat here in 4 months, 5 months, a year's time discussing things from a slightly better perspective and a slightly more optimistic perspective. So let's just go around the table to finish. Dan, you've picked up the microphone. Let's start with you.
Yeah, I think the upcoming World Cup is crucial. We saw with 2003, I think it was, when the England Rugby Union team won their World Cup. And then the media coverage they got off that, the clubs, even clubs like Sale, their crowds went up. I think a successful World Cup with England winning it will give us the media coverage that we want. Don't wish to look at a downside, but I just question whether the current London Broncos administration are ready to deal with that potential success and the extra support and media coverage that they might get off the back of that. I hope so.
Maybe that's something that the RFL can look at. Mark, let's come to you next.
I think success on the field is absolutely key, but the thing that I notice a lot in my different roles is the coverage that we get for Rugby League in London in particular. I mean, London is a unique, very expensive, very diverse marketplace, both in terms of sport that people can go and watch, but also what they choose to read, and I think that makes it challenging for a sport that is predominantly based outside the capital. And I think, yes, when the results for Broncos do start to come, and we all around this table absolutely want them to, I think we need to be able to capitalise on the likes of the World Cup and on the likes of that success, so that people see that there's a successful rugby league side in London. I think part of the reason that Broncos don't get the crowds that they deserve is due to the just lack of understanding and knowledge that there's a Super League club in the capital. And I think if you were to get the crowds back, that the club feel would come back and the players would come out and play for the fans. And I think for that reason, as well as just general success on the field, I think we need to look at how things are going, and that is changing. You look at the likes of the Evening Standard with their regular piece, and I do know the RFL have put a lot into that to make sure that the capital is getting its fair share of coverage, and some broadsheets and so on have picked it up as well. And I think that's a success for the sport generally, and I think that's something that we do need to capitalise on in London.
Ron?
How can you say rugby league hasn't worked when we haven't given it a chance to work? The only time we will know whether rugby league works is when there's a professional side capable of winning Super League. If you get a team that's consistently successful with every opportunity of winning either the Challenge Cup final or the Grand Final, then we will know whether Super League in London has worked or not.
And how does we make that happen? What one thing?
Unfortunately, from where we are now, that's not going to be a quick fix. It's got to be more experience for the juniors, because our juniors, with a couple of exceptions, are not of the same standard as people of the same age in Wigan or Leeds. Secondly, we need more investment. And thirdly, we need special dispensation from the RFL to take into account, the unique situation that London finds itself in terms of accommodation costs, travelling costs and so on. If none of that happens, let's go back to having a little friendly club again.
Nigel?
Well, just with purely with the Broncos hat on, as Ron says, the success in terms of the playing is going to be a long time coming unless things change very radically, or I did with the Euro Millions tonight. But it's just, I'd like to get back to the club feel. There needs to be a real good spirit, volunteer. I think we might hear, there is a lack of resource at the club. Now, that resource in the past wasn't there, but the volunteers filled a lot of gap in that. I used to sell programmes at Brentford and do stuff, but they didn't want you. They don't want you now. And similarly, some of the staff they've got rid of cared about the place and did the extra mile. And I think the people they've got now don't. It's just a job. And it's little things like I phoned up today to get a ticket for the Sheffield game, and they need to be sent registered post. Well, why? I want to pick it up at the Salford game to save them money. Well, you can't do that because it won't be ready. Registered post costs 11 minutes. Ticket the first class. No, can't do that. Right, But give the club back to the supporters. A lot of supporters, hardcore, have left or don't go. People used to go away games, don't go. People used to put a lot of money in sponsoring players. Sorry, your swear button.
I'll have to edit now.
And I just want to get back to that club feeling where we're all in it together, and I'm sure that transmits to the players as well.
Nigel, we'd probably say that I'm sure that a few of those come down to logistical reasons. Again, Broncos aren't here to answer these particular questions, but I'm saying that there probably is a reason behind that, for whatever reason it would be. But Tim?
Yeah, I just wonder if we're looking at success on the pitch, if a change of coach is something that should be looked at. I was sort of thinking before tonight, and what has Tony Ray actually done that Rob Powell, for all his effort, didn't do? And I think certainly with Rob Powell, you sort of got the opinion that he really did care about it, and whereas you get that to an extent with Tony Ray, it doesn't quite come across all the time.
I might have to disagree. I only that with Tony's involvement over the last few years, I think that he has got it in his blood and he knows it. I don't doubt that by any stretch. Whether a change of coach at this point, I don't know. As I mentioned before, hinted, Tony hasn't had too many of his own players, in inverted commas, in this squad. Maybe there's an option there to give him that opportunity in the future. I don't know. Interesting thoughts, Tim. Let's go to you, David.
I think outside of Super League, Rugby League is looking very promising. London Scholars last season came within one game of making the playoffs. There are great signs coming out of Hemel and Oxford. Gloucestershire are having problems their first season. But the game is definitely spreading around the south of England, and it's moving to better places. The Broncos, as the flagship of London Rugby League and Southern Rugby League, are having it really tough, and there's clearly disenchantment amongst fans, as we've heard around the table here tonight. And a lot of it is down to the fact that the Broncos could do more to help fans keep in touch with the club. It's all very well saying, yes, we'll look on the website, look on Facebook, but regular news items coming out from the club, just positive signs of the club all the time, doesn't hurt. And I don't think we've had that, and I think that is a problem, that they see a defeat, they see a defeat, they see a defeat, and there are very few positives. Nice story about Kieran Dixon. There was a lovely piece by George Riley a few weeks ago after he had that fantastic spell around Easter. But how often do you see positive things about London Rugby League players?
And you mentioned before, David, about there are certain positives with scholars and around the divisions. I guess, Darren, if we come to you from an RFL perspective and say, what can be done to create the success, is the work that's currently being done with your level and around the clubs and the competition, is that a continuation of that going to be a factor in future success?
Oh, absolutely. I think Ron mentioned that perhaps youngsters in this region aren't as competitive or aren't of the standard as you find in other regions, but the game is still younger, so their rugby league playing experience is shorter. That said, I actually think there's a fair crop of people, there's a fair crop of athletes, so the physical makeup of what they're like coming through that will absolutely compete with anyone else who's out there. And I'm not just talking Wigan or Leeds, I'm talking Australian, that type of thing, because the pool is there. So if there was a fix, well, there isn't a quick fix, but patience perhaps.
Well, that's why London needs to succeed. That very reason. Absolutely spot on.
And also, David,
I was going to say, the one thing is, yes, we've got the athletes, but the infrastructure of training and the players. I remember 3 years ago, Brian McDermott made huge play about 6 southern-based players in the Broncos team. They lost by 45 points that day. They were in the team, but they haven't got the rugby league background that any number of amateur players around Yorkshire and Lancashire have got. And no matter how much we want them to succeed and how much we want London players to succeed, they are starting a long way back, and it'll take years for this to develop. And it's starting, but it'll take another half dozen years at least before players will have spent 8-10 years growing up playing rugby league. They've played 4 years, but these boys that are coming up in through Leeds and Bradford have spent 10-12 years. Until we can get them playing 8 and 10 years, we're going to be behind the 8 ball on this.
This is probably the wrong time to introduce this question, running at 10 minutes over our current allocated time. Does anybody in here think that a season, again, the restructuring of the competition is coming in some way, shape or form? Does anyone think that a season or 2 or 3 in the division below for Broncos would be the best thing? Something that would be positive? Anyone?
Definitely not.
No,
Definitely not. No from Ron.
Not.
I mean, it might be good in the long term for Broncos, but we just had the comment that people are about to take the Australians on. We can't beat the Australians with the M62 gene pool, So we've got to have something to aspire to down here.
Yeah, and it's also having a flag. So you've got the young athletes who are good at 4 or 5 sports. You've got to make them want to choose rugby league. And one of the things that you're going to do that through is having a successful side locally where they can see that as a pathway and they can say, well, I'm from London, I'm proud to be from London, I can play for the London club. And you need to get that to sway those, they're going to be world class or at least international class in probably 3 or 4 sports if they get the training and go through the right systems. If we've got, the structure, the beginnings of it now, if we can start to track those players, then, I think we're on the right track.
Well, that's it then for Rugby League Down South for this week. The Pubcast as it's been. Thank you to everyone for taking the time out to come and meet. And on the, I was going to say on the South Bank. We're not quite on the South Bank. I kept saying that, but it's not. We're at South Bank University, next door to the headquarters of the RFL in London. Tim, thank you. Ron, thank you. Same to you, David, and to you, Mark. Darren from the RFL, and to Dan, and to Nigel. Thanks for sparing some time this evening. And Ron, it was your idea. Are you happier?
Enjoyed every minute of it, Ramo. Thank you.
Back next week with Rugby League Down South.